Good evening. I'm Steve Ella, president of Gratz. This is the third occasion at which I have the honor of introducing a Schusterman Distinguished Scholar Lecturer. In the recent past, under the auspices of this very lecture series, we have learned together about citron merchants and Jewish engagement in the Atlantic slave trade. In each instance, and this goes much farther back than my involvement, Gratz College brings to our community outstanding scholarship. We are indebted to Bob Schusterman and Gratz Governor Melissa Schusterman for their extended family support and investment in our beloved college. This evening's program is particularly special. Tonight, we welcome Dr. Ayal Feinberg to Gratz College, Associate Professor of Political Science and Antisemitism Studies, and the incoming Director of the Center for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights. Dr. Feinberg comes to us most directly from Texas A&M, but I eagerly point out that he had initially come to Texas from nearby Abington. This then is a homecoming for Ayal. Dr. Feinberg is a quantitative research fellow at the Anti-Defamation League Center for Anti-Semitism Research, and his writings has appeared in scholarly and popular periodicals and cited during the 2019 House Judiciary Committee's hearing on hate crime and the rise of white nationalism. Dr. Feinberg takes over our center at a propitious moment. The center is home to the world's largest graduate program in Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and features a critical public-facing programming like this one, notably the Arnold and Esther Tuzman Memorial Holocaust Teach-In. Holocaust and Genocide Studies is a crucial component of Gratz's academic program and our mission to reach our community and students through the prism of Jewish wisdom. For the hundreds of community members who register for tonight's program and are participating online, I'm told, there is a link in the chat box for you to deepen your investment in Gratz's fundraising effort for our center, part of the lead up to our annual campaign next week. As a social scientist and educator, Dr. Feinberg possesses a remarkable capacity to bring Holocaust education, Israel, and anti-Semitism studies together. Dr. Feinberg's presentation is therefore aptly titled, The Knots That Bind the Holocaust, Israel, and Contemporary Anti-Semitism. It is my dutiful pleasure to introduce, for the first time of many future occasions, Gratz's Professor Ayal Feinberg.
Everyone, such a pleasure to be here today. First and foremost, I want to thank Kristen for very generous and the Schusterman family. It's an understatement for me to say that I'm thrilled to be here. I stand before you today humbled by the opportunity to be the director of the Center for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights, but incredibly excited about what I'm going to bring to this world, to Gratz, and the communities that this great institution serves. The views I share today are entirely my own. They shouldn't apply to any organizations that I consult with or work with. But I want to move directly into the knots that bind the Holocaust, Israel, and contemporary anti-Semitism. That title is purposefully dense. On the one hand, the Holocaust, Israel, and contemporary anti-Semitism are foundational to explaining the Jewish identity. On the other hand, there are each factors that contribute to Jewish insecurity. These phenomena, while distinct, are rarely independent of each other. And like a complicated knot, they interact in ways that bind, making the contemporary Jewish experience seemingly impossible to disentangle. Today, I will share what scholars and practitioners are beginning to do to untie this critical knot. With this speech, I endeavor to do three things. First, I'm going to provide an assessment on the state of Jewish insecurity. I'll discuss the weaponization of anti-Semitism, the hardening of anti-Zionism, and the declining support for Israel. and the waning influence of the Holocaust. I'll illustrate how these phenomena are profoundly contributing to the concerns surrounding contemporary Jewish identity and our Jewish future. I also want to explain the current state of anti-Semitism studies and explore why anti-Semitism hasn't received the same scholarly attention as other forms of discrimination and hatred. Utilizing the three phenomena that I already mentioned, I plan on illustrating through my prism as a quantitative social scientist the reasons why we haven't made tremendous strides in the empirical analysis of anti-Semitism, in part because it is devastatingly complicated to study. And third, I want to close, if I can, on an optimistic note and a personal one. In the last few years, I have witnessed what I hope ends up being a renaissance in contemporary anti-Semitism studies. I'm going to share how my colleagues and I have begun to disentangle the complications that I'm going to share with you today. And I'll briefly present some of the newest anti-Semitism research insights, including some never before shared findings from the newest academic research that I'm pursuing. So let's begin. I'm sure now I've clicked this so many times, it's going to go ahead. Please. There we go. Okay. In both my professional and personal life, I interact with a large number of Jewish Americans. They range in age from retired to college bound. In practice, from Orthodox to secular. They live in big cities and small towns, in red states like me and blue states. Several are doctors and lawyers, but many are teachers and social workers and public servants. Some regularly go to Israel, and others aren't even interested in birthright. Few don't even know what birthright is. Every single Jewish person that I've spoken to in the last 5 years about my work examining anti-Semitism have all asked me the same question. Why is anti-Semitism getting worse? To understand the seriousness of anti-Semitism today, I ask that we take a moment to recognize the importance of this consensus. And we can start with some humor. This is not new, but the idea that Jews at any point in time can agree on anything is a small miracle. And in this case, it's an unfortunate achievement. We've all heard the expression, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, and the consenting smiles that this phrase imparts are grounded in certain cultural and religious truths. Today, Jews haven't figured out how they want to spell anti-Semitism, or even if they want to use the term anti-Semitism to describe hostile beliefs and behavior towards Jews, as a growing number are using the term Jew hatred. As with variations in spelling and terminology, Jews do not employ a universal definition of anti-Semitism. Even the organizations that are tasked with combating anti-Semitism often wrestle with how to define it and what attitudes and actions actually constitute it, and best measure it. Despite all this foundational dissimilarity, debate, and disagreement surrounding the phenomena of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, today Jews agree. Anti-Semitism is getting worse. It is on the rise. And nearly all of them believe it needs to be better addressed. So before I directly broach this question, why is anti-Semitism getting worse? And all the challenges scholars and practitioners have in providing a comprehensive answer to this question, we need to acknowledge what a dramatic departure today's Jewish insecurity is and represents from just a decade or two earlier. I grew up just a few miles from here, in a suburb of Philadelphia that you guys now know as home. While not immune to occasional anti-Semitic incidents, I was free of any altercation that made me question any security surrounding my identity. In the last year and a half of living in Dallas, Texas, 2 extreme cases of violence, the Colleyville synagogue attack and recently the Allen Mall massacre, were perpetrated by deeply anti-Semitic offenders. Some of my earliest and happiest memories in this area were actually at JCC Day Camp in Ewing, New Jersey. I remember starting each day singing Hatikva, played a round of Gaga or two, dips in the pool, apple juice and graham crackers with my friends. Today, going to the JCC just for a tennis trail starts off with having my license checked by an armed guard outside of the facility. Occasionally, they open up my trunk for a weapons check. I guess the guard wasn't convinced that my name is sufficient. In 2000 in this country, the majority of voters cast a ballot for a ticket that had an Orthodox Jewish president. Today, the former president and leading candidate for the Republican Party is having casual dinners with some of the nation's most outspoken anti-Semites. So how did we get here? Why is anti-Semitism getting worse? As is articulated by every Jew I've met since beginning the study of anti-Semitism. Why is today such a grave departure from just several decades ago? Of course, I can write a dissertation on this. I actually did. But instead, I propose that we can and must understand Jewish identity and Jewish insecurity through evaluating three axioms that I'm going to share today. First is the weaponization of anti-Semitism. The second is the hardening of anti-Zionism and declining support for Israel. And the third is the waning influence of the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism is being weaponized. Its weaponization is occurring within the political mainstream and the ideological fringes. Democrats rightfully point to the deeply concerning Jewish conspiracies espoused by Republican Congressperson Marjorie Taylor Greene and the white nationalism promoted by Steve Bannon and others. They use this aforementioned anti-Semitism as evidence that Republicans regularly peddle in Jew hatred and that the Republican Party doesn't respect Jewish security or values. Similarly, Republicans point to broad Democratic silence over anti-Semitic comments tweeted by Congressperson Ilhan Omar, as well as their failure to prevent or widely condemn anti-Zionist slanders or lies that are propagated by Congressperson Rashida Tlaib. Republicans use these incidents and others to underscore that support for Israel is no longer an issue. Republicans argue they are the only party ready to defend Israel unconditionally, and therefore the only party truly committed to Jewish security. Both parties use the actions of the other to deflect acts of anti-Semitism within their own ranks, and to pressure their Jewish members and their donors to keep an eye on the real perpetrators. And they always happen to be on the other side. Outside the Beltway, as we move towards our ideological extremes, anti-Semitism is more rampant. Anti-Zionism that ends up constituting or promoting anti-Semitism is often a litmus test for far-left organizations. Zionists need not apply. On the far right, anti-Semitism isn't only common, some have argued it is essential. Anti-Semitic conspiracies drive QAnon, white nationalism, and Christian nationalism. Shared anti-Semitism is seen not only as a recruitment opportunity, but as a tool to drive apart natural alliances between Jews and American minority groups. Disempowering the Jews is a necessary precursor to achieving a number of far-right political ambitions. On the ideological fringes, anti-Semitism, again, often manifests as conspiratorial anti-Zionism. Many of you might be familiar with the Deadly Exchange campaign, which uses a series of systematic exaggerations and outright lies to declare that American law enforcement learns racist and deadly tactics from trips to Israel. This messaging, becoming more common on 4chan and the campus quad, is interchangeable between far-left anti-Zionist groups and white nationalists and neo-Nazis. This provides an ideal segue into noting that anti-Zionism is hardening and support for Israel is declining. We know this empirically. While many still opine for the realization of the two-state solution, Jews on most campuses know that there is hardly any active appetite for an Israel-Palestine compromise. Shared interfaith events like Passover, Ramadan, co-celebrations are becoming increasingly rare as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is cited as factors that prevent co-sponsorship. Anti-normalization tactics, the unwillingness to engage with others that disagree with you, becoming the norm. Espousing Zionism is being conflated with legitimizing violence and creating a sense of palpable danger. Gone are the days that Sabra hummus alone is being boycotted. Today, some Israeli professors, for no reason other than their national origin, and students of their courses as well, are being boycotted, doxxed, and in some cases face social ostracism. Zionism is regularly equated to Nazism, Israel with Nazi Germany, and Israelis with Nazis. Relatedly, the influence of the Holocaust is waning. In Israel alone, over 40 survivors are dying each day. Even though we are making tremendous strides in Holocaust education mandates around the country, there is a growing feeling that Holocaust education isn't producing the desired outcome, a world with less hatred and diminished anti-Semitism. Across the country, essential Holocaust reading is being protested, and associated books are being removed from school libraries. With Jewish history, a victim of growing backlash towards critical race theory, or what many people think is critical race theory. Just 30 minutes from my house in Dallas, in quite beautiful upper middle class South like Texas, the school administrator made headlines for articulating that, quote, other perspectives, end quote, on the Holocaust. Flipping the coin, there are concerns that Jewish history, anti-Semitism, and the Holocaust are being left out of new ethnic studies curriculum because Jews are, quote, white and privileged, end quote. Dara Horn's recent article in The Atlantic asks, is Holocaust education making anti-Semitism worse? While I'm going to share evidence with you today that her, quote, disturbing conclusion that Holocaust education is incapable of addressing contemporary anti-Semitism, end quote, that's likely premature, but her underlying sentiments are well-founded and grounded in our ever-increasing Jewish insecurity. I contend these three axioms, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, the hardening of anti-Zionism, decreased support for Israel, and the waning influence of the Holocaust, aren't debated. Both separately and together, they are contributing to worsening anti-Semitism. That said, we know next to nothing about how the weaponization of anti-Semitism, the hardening of anti-Zionism, declining support for Israel, and the waning influence of the Holocaust meaningfully interact with each other. I'm not exaggerating this vacuum of empirical knowledge for dramatic effect. Worse, without better understanding the relationship between these phenomena, it is almost impossible for us to successfully tackle it. As a political scientist, I want to explain the challenges associated with evaluating the shared relationships between the weaponization of anti-Semitism, the hardening of anti-Zionism, and decreasing support for Israel, as well as the waning influence of the Holocaust. After all, there is a legitimate reason why scholars have been spinning their wheels in the mud for so long, trying to study anti-Semitism. For the purposes of this exercise, let's start by saying we're interested in understanding and ultimately reducing the hardening of anti-Zionist positions and decreased support for Israel. In quantitative terms, how I study this phenomenon, or these phenomena, our dependent variable is decreasing support for Zionism. So one could hypothesize that the waning influence of the Holocaust could decrease support for Zionism. For many, the Holocaust crystallizes, exemplifies, and legitimizes the genocidal insecurity that existed for Jews as a nationless people for over 2 millennia. As more time continues to pass, from the horrors of the gas chambers and as fewer and fewer people can interact with survivors of this tragedy, its memory becomes more distant and less palpable. Consequently, the deep Jewish insecurity that it exemplifies is less salient and less relevant. The security-based need for a Jewish state, less justified. One could also hypothesize that raising anti-Semitism could decrease support for Zionism. Extant research shows a link, albeit to varying degrees, of overlap between individuals and groups possessing anti-Semitic attitudes and beliefs and holding virulent anti-Zionist attitudes. If more people are becoming anti-Semitic, we don't need to do a deep dive to recognize that this could and does manifest as increased hatred for the world's only Jewish state and a belief that it is an illegitimate entity. These hypotheses, however, discount the potential relationship that rising anti-Semitism and the waning Holocaust influence may have on each other. One could certainly hypothesize that the waning Holocaust influence increases rising anti-Semitism, thus decreasing support for Zionism. It is equally reasonable to assume that rising anti-Semitism might be driving waning Holocaust influence, thus leading to decreasing support for Zionism. Of course, it's also feasible that the waning influence of the Holocaust and rising anti-Semitism, while operating independently of each other, together result in the decreasing support of Zionism. Is this not sufficiently complicated yet? But wait, does it make sense that variation in support of Zionism is really the endpoint of our equations? What if we take the arrows of the equations that I just showed you and reverse them? What if we made decreasing support of Zionism our independent? One could hypothesize that decreasing support of Zionism could contribute to the waning influence of the Holocaust. One could also hypothesize that decreasing support of Zionism could contribute to rising anti-Semitism. One could also hypothesize that decreasing support of Zionism leads to rising anti-Semitism and the waning influence of the Holocaust, and it's certainly feasible that decreasing support of Zionism can lead to the waning influence of the Holocaust and then rising anti-Semitism. We aren't even close to all the possible hypotheses we could generate simply evaluating these three phenomena. I'll ask again, is this not sufficiently complicated yet? Okay, let's take this even a step further. What if the relationship between the weaponization of anti-Semitism and decreasing support of Zionism and the waning influence of the Holocaust have no genuine endpoints? Given the hypotheses already presented, it is completely reasonable that the relationships between these phenomena may be circular. Methodologically speaking, testing such simultaneous relationships is significantly more challenging. In short, the fracturing of Zionism, fleeting Holocaust memory, and rising anti-Semitism is devastatingly complex for scholars to examine. Their study, and the study of Jewish identity and insecurity, is hampered by phenomena that are exceptionally hard to measure and riddled by concerns of endogeneity. This is made even more difficult by a variety of factors that I simply don't have time to expound on in this presentation, but they include challenges measuring and operationalizing anti-Semitism, overcoming social desirability bias, concerns related to data availability, concerns related to research costs, small reviewer pool, and relatedly, limited outlets for publication of our work. It is this complexity and the associated challenges that I have shared with you today that have resulted in few meaningfully complex empirical research projects examining anti-Semitism in rigorous ways. The consequence of this is that it has made our knowledge of anti-Semitism primarily qualitative, historical, anecdotal, and opinion-driven. It has left anti-Semitism research with little direct impact on policy, which has resulted in practitioners using trial and error methods to employ interventions and generate policies designed to combat Jew hatred. I'm excited to share a possible paradigm shift in how we study anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, the impact of the Holocaust, the impact of Holocaust knowledge, and the effectiveness of Holocaust education. As I started my dissertation in 2016, I was one of only a handful of scholars focused primarily on anti-Semitism, utilizing quantitative approaches to the study. Today, there are dozens of impactful American researchers focused on anti-Semitism. There is exponential growth in general scholarly work surrounding anti-Semitism. Social scientists and Jewish organizations alike, with considerable resources and employing, finally, rigorous methods, are beginning to treat Jew hatred as a phenomena worthy of concern and their attention. Multifaceted topics like Jewish insecurity, while challenging, aren't impossible to study empirically. Serious efforts today are being employed to advance theories behind anti-Semitism, in large part utilizing prior theories from social behavior that have already explained variation in hate and prejudice. But in some cases, new anti-Semitism-specific theories are being crafted and later applied more broadly, contributing to more general scholarship on hate and discrimination. Complex relationships like the ones I shared today can be tested, albeit in stages. And we are finally developing the foundational knowledge we need in order to begin untangling this knot and all the factors that contribute to Jewish identity and explain Jewish insecurity. This month marks a full year I've been working at the ADL's newly created Center for Anti-Semitism Research, overseen by the President of Anti-Semitism Research, Williams, and Quantitative Director, Emmett Soko. I've also had the privilege of working closely with senior researcher Jacob Dennett, who's responsible for much of the data visualization I'm about to share. Since CAR's creation, the quality, rigor, and scope of anti-Semitism research at the ADL has climbed. The 2022 Anti-Semitism Index, looking at anti-Semitic attitudes in America, marks the first meaningful expansion of how anti-Semitic attitudes are measured within the organization in nearly 60 years. Thinking again about the nexus between anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and the Holocaust, this index has already delivered a variety of critical findings. First, according to the index, anti-Semitic beliefs are definitely on the rise. The conversations that I've had with many Jews over the last 5 years are legitimated by this. Today, 1 in 5 Americans believe 6 or more anti-Semitic tropes, compared to a little more than half that number only 4 years ago. A significant number of Americans hold beliefs about Israel that are anti-Semitic in orientation. For example, 40% of Americans believe it is least slightly appropriate to say Israel treats Palestinians like the Nazis treated the Jews. And nearly 1 in 5 Americans are uncomfortable spending time with a person who supports Israel. The index has also explored the relationship between anti-Semitism, focused on Jewish tropes, and anti-Semitism, focused on Israel. This research has revealed a moderate but substantive correlation between the belief in anti-Jewish tropes and anti-Israel sentiment across the respondents, with older adults having a significantly higher correlation than we find in younger adults. This survey also evaluated perceived Jewish knowledge of the Holocaust, perceived Jewish knowledge, Holocaust knowledge, and Holocaust education's effects on anti-Semitism. Perhaps unsurprising, the number of tropes endorsed by respondents was correlated with perceived self-knowledge of Jews, with respondents saying, quote, they know nothing, end quote, about Jews and Judaism, endorsing a significantly higher average number of anti-Semitic beliefs. We then asked respondents whether they know how many Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Here, I think you'll find the variation extraordinary. Unlike the question that we ask, where we ask respondents whether they know how large the Jewish population is here in the United States, Ignorance in this case is associated with a giant increase in the number of tropes that are endorsed by respondents. On average, those respondents believing 1 million or less Jews were murdered in the Holocaust endorsed 7.3 anti-Semitic tropes. In short, this means that a huge proportion of people incorrectly believing 1 million or less Jews were killed in the Holocaust qualify as anti-Semitic. Digging deeper in the nexus between Holocaust knowledge and education and anti-Semitism, we discovered the respondents that meaningfully learned about the Holocaust in school endorsed significantly fewer tropes than those who only learned of the Holocaust briefly, where it was only simply mentioned. And never before reported, and not yet an official finding of the ADL, the index shows that anti-Semitism, respondents exhibiting Holocaust ignorance and the severe underestimation of Jews killed in the Holocaust are also significantly more likely to agree that a higher number of anti-Israel statements in our index. I'd like to say here that this is a tragedy, but there's irony to it. With those demonstrating the greatest number of Holocaust illiteracy are those respondents that are more likely to legitimize comparison of Israel to the Nazis. Our survey design and the rigor behind its findings demonstrate that organizations like the ADL are finally investing considerable resources into understanding the relationships between anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and Holocaust knowledge and education with a degree of rigor that it deserves. Most excitingly, the ADL is now investing scholarly resources into employing survey experiments to tease out underlying mechanisms that help explain variation in anti-Semitism. This is a forward approach to understanding Jew hatred that I'm proud to have helped pioneer for political science anti-Semitism research, along with my co-author, Dr. Jacob Scott Lewis. That said, before I go into a little bit of my own experimental research, I want to quickly share one ADL experiment. In 2022, we showed respondents this image. We asked them, and I'll ask you, would you consider this person white? This is an image of Dudu Tusa, an Israeli musician whose family hails from Iraq and Kuwait. However, we didn't tell respondents who they were looking at. Respondents were randomly assigned to 3 equally sized groups. The first group was told that the person that was pictured, Dudu Tusa, was a Jewish singer from Israel. The second group was told that the person that was pictured was an Arab singer from Iraq. The third group was told that this was simply a singer from the United States. All respondents, as I asked you, were then asked if they would consider this person white. The experiment revealed that being Jewish, being considered Jewish, has a whitening effect. Respondents who were told that the photo was of a Jewish singer from Israel were much more likely to consider the person white, rather than respondents who were told that the person was an Arab singer from Iraq or simply a singer from the United States. There's much more to uncover with this experiment, specifically its possible effects on policy, but I will tell you that initial findings suggest that white respondents who also identify the singer as white endorse significantly fewer anti-Semitic tropes. Finally, I want to briefly share 2 anti-Semitism experiments that Dr. Lewis and I have been researching for the past year and a half. Doing so, I hope, will actually allow me to end this on a positive note, or maybe optimistic note. My research has long been critical of the exclusive unidirectional focus that political scientists have placed on how diasporas influence their homeland. However, concerns surrounding how Israel could affect the Jewish diaspora often go back to the infamous Blaustein-Ben Gurion exchange. In fact, new empirical work merging the Holocaust, non-Nazi anti-Semitism, and Jewish nationalism from Drs. Kopstein and Wittenberg highlight how Jewish nationalism pre-Israel was the primary factor in determining, or a primary factor in determining anti-Jewish pogroms in Poland. As a side, I'm thrilled that Dr. Kopstein is going to be delivering a keynote address for us. Building on this growing research, Dr. Lewis and I aim to evaluate alleged blame on diaspora Jews for the actions of Israel, as well as their perceived responsibility to speak out against the state. Utilizing nationally representative survey experiments both here in the United States and the UK, we divided respondents into equally sized groups, exposing them to a synthetic New York Times story covering an attack that resulted in a hospital and several apartment buildings being destroyed. There were different versions of the story, but the only meaningful detail that changed was the perpetrator and the target. This included Israel targeting Gaza, Russia targeting the Ukraine, Saudi Arabia targeting Yemen, among others. Respondents were then asked whether Jews or Russians or Saudis or Muslims living in their country are to blame for the actions of their associated state, and whether or not they have a responsibility to speak out against it. Following the exposure to these conflict vignettes, it is only Jews, not Russians, not Saudis, or Muslims more broadly, that experience an increase in blame for the actions of their state or experience an increase in the responsibility to speak out. This mechanism, this dynamic is specific to Jews. Additionally, my own work, prior work, provides clear empirical evidence through hate crime and event data analysis that when Israel is engaged in a violent conflict with Hamas in Gaza or Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Jewish diaspora experience heightened anti-Semitism, even here in the United States. But scholars haven't meaningfully evaluated the consequence of this anti-Semitism at the national level. Again, utilizing a nationwide survey experiment, Dr. Lewis and I began disentangling the effects of hate crime exposure on policy preference. We divided our respondents into equally sized groups. We have most groups read a short story about crime. Some read a story about hate crime. Several iterations of that story are anti-Semitic. And they focus on anti-Semitic hate crime, including this crime that occurred at the start of Operation Guardian of the Walls in 2021 in LA, where individuals, Jewish individuals eating outside, were targeted simply for being visibly Jewish. Following these vignettes, we asked respondents a series of questions about their foreign policy preferences for a variety of countries. We are able to show that exposure to anti-Semitism, including Israel-specific anti-Semitism, results in increased support for American foreign policies that actually favor Israel. Specifically, they heighten general support for an American-Israel alliance, they increase support for military aid, and even generate support for preferential trade agreements. This finding, I contend, potentially provides a glass-half-full approach to understanding Israel-motivated hate crimes. As terrible as the spikes in anti-Semitic hate crimes are following Israeli conflict, our research suggests that perpetrators of these bias incidents and hate crimes are actually doing a disservice to their own cause. Exposure to anti-Semitic hate crimes pushes American foreign policy preferences closer to Israel. To close, I want to reiterate some of the points that hopefully made in this speech. First, we are seeing a genuine increase in anti-Semitism, a hardening of anti-Zionism, and decrease in support for Israel, both within and outside of the Jewish community, and the waning influence of the Holocaust. Second, I contend that one of the reasons this is taking place is because for decades, scholars have failed to meaningfully address contemporary anti-Semitism, partly because it wasn't salient, but largely because it was deemed too complex. Third, despite this vacuum of anti-Semitism research, scholars, practitioners, and educators are being reactive. I believe we are witnessing a renaissance in anti-Semitism work that will significantly advance the way we combat Jew hatred and develop Holocaust education moving forward. Under my tenure, I promise Gratz's Center for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights is going to be a major contributor to the resurgence of scholarship benefiting the Jewish community. Building on Gratz's already incredible faculty, we are going to continue to bring in the best Holocaust, human rights, and anti-Semitism scholars in the world in order to educate our students and our community audience. We are going to develop collaborative partnerships with the leading Holocaust educators and civil rights organizations. Through these partnerships, we are going to impact policy that will improve the Jewish community and our nation. We are going to continue to make the world a more educated place, and in doing so, we're going to help dilute the hate and the prejudice that has hurt so many, both in our community, in our country, and around the world. I just want to thank you all for your time in this tremendous honor. Thank you.
I wanted to thank all of you for coming here into the building. I wanted to thank all of you who joined us on Zoom. And I wanted to all let you know before you go tonight that on Tuesday, May 23rd, we are launching the Power Up Gratz Giving Day Learn-a-thon. So all of you here like to learn. So I hope you'll join us on Tuesday. Come to our website. There's going to be a whole day of sessions on a variety of topics featuring our faculty, featuring our alumni who are out there in the world doing great things on a variety of topics. So it should be a lot of fun. There's no quizzes or tests. It's just a fun learn-a-thon. You can join us as you would like. And we're raising money for our annual fund. So I hope you participate. And thank you again for coming. Have a good night.